Hello and welcome to another episode of Travel for Curious Minds, brought to you by Jules Verne. I'm your host Abbey, but today is going to be a slightly different episode where I won't be the only host. So please welcome our podcast producer, Steve.
Hello, Abbey.
This is going to be a very different episode. I feel like I'm in the hot seat today.
I feel like I'm in the hot seat today because apparently I'm hosting.
So would you like to explain to our listeners and viewers why we're doing a slightly different episode this time around?
We come to the end of this season with Travel for Curious Minds, and we are in the middle of recording some new episodes, which we're doing behind the scenes. So what we thought we'd do is I ask you some questions, get to know the host a little bit better, find out a bit more about your world and your travel world, and maybe along the way we can have a chat about some of the episodes that we've produced together and maybe what our highlights have been.
So let's dive right in, and I will hand over control of my lovely podcast to you.
No pressure. So Abbey, welcome to Travel for Curious Minds.
Thank you.
So I don't think we've ever said in the episodes anywhere how you got into travel. Tell us about how your travel world started.
I don't think there was a point in my life where travel was sort of defined. It's kind of been around in my life ever since I was born. I was incredibly young when I moved to Zimbabwe from the UK. So I lived in Zimbabwe off and on for nearly a decade. And when coming back to the UK to visit family and friends, my family would ensure that we travelled in Europe. So we would be, on ferries, Eurostar, going into Europe, driving, always taking the scenic route, as my parents would say, which seemed to be incredibly long. But actually now as an adult, I really appreciate those little moments, popping into a cafe in France in what seemed like the middle of nowhere, driving into Germany, going through forests and things in Holland, all of that sort of stuff. So it's not been a defining moment where I thought, right, that's it. That's where I'm going to be, travel and tourism when I'm older. But it's kind of been something that's always been bubbling along in the background. And I was incredibly lucky. I sort of fell into many jobs within the industry, whether it be aviation, customer service, sales, or now what I do is more of a business development role. So it's just sort of been one of those things. I've been incredibly lucky in my career. I've worked for Jules Verne for a long time, again, nearly a decade, and I absolutely love what we do. And I love that I get to have a passion that is also my job. It's incredible.
Can you remember the moments that you kind of look back and think, that's what travel was about for me. That's what I really like. What sticks in your mind in those younger journeys?
I think one of the biggest memories I possibly have that I think made a real impact on me was when living in Zimbabwe. We went to a local village to hand over some items that somebody had sort of taken off my dad. I think my dad was doing a refurb, and some of the house items were going to a local village. And I remember being very young, sitting in the truck, going into the village, seeing these houses that were very different to where I lived, very, different looking. And the village itself was completely different to where I lived in Mount Pleasant. And I remember going in and just seeing all the children, and they were running up and they were touching my hair and they were touching my clothes. And I remember sitting there thinking, this seems really different, but also really intriguing. And I wanted to know more, and I wanted to go play, and I wanted to play with their toys, and I wanted to go into their bedrooms and see what it was like, because it was different. It was completely different to me. And I think at a young age, that's probably when I realized that kind of getting under the skin of different destinations and different cultures is really important, because it's a vivid memory of mine that I met people that were different to me and lived different to me, but in the same country. And when then traveling further afield and going to different places, you see these different cultures and you just want to be a part of it and, respectfully learn about how other people live.
That is interesting, because that in all of the episodes we've made together, and we've been doing this quite a long time, haven't we? That theme of it's almost like a contradiction, really. It's the fact that the culture or the country is different, but that people are the same, and that that interesting balance between getting to know different people, getting to know different cultures, that sort of exploring that point of difference, whilst at the same time discovering that around the world, the vast majority of people are nice and kind and friendly, and that for me has been an intriguing part of the conversations that a lot of our guests have talked about. Is that something that for you, the kind of the people and discovery has resonate with you?
Definitely. And I think some of the conversations we've had over the number of years we've been working together and doing the podcast, it has become really apparent that the want to travel might be to see something new, to experience something new, whether that be, going to Petra and seeing Petra, whether it'll be going to India and doing a street market and a tour, but actually that might be the want to travel. But when people get there, it's the connection, it's the human side, it's the sharing the stories that really make an impact on people. We've heard from lots of guests on the podcast about amazing places they visited around the world, but the things that seem to be resonating with people more and capturing their heart more is the connections with other people, whether it be somebody they met in a local restaurant that then became a lifelong friend, or a guide, or people that have met their husbands and wives and longtime friends traveling. So I think that's the biggest thing, isn't it? It's the connection that people don't necessarily realise that's what they're traveling for, but that's what they get at the end of it.
Yeah. And in your travel experience, whether that's personal or professional, what are the one or two situations that stick in your mind where you've connected with people you didn't expect to connect with, or something interesting's happened?
I think I've been incredibly lucky, both personally and professionally, the amount I've got to travel, and I know that that's something that I am incredibly privileged to be able to do. Looking at it from a professional point of view, I have travelled with many of our clients, our customers at Jules Verne, and I've sat around having dinner with them and I've heard their travel stories. And, I'm sure people won't mind me saying, but sometimes the age gap has been quite large. I started working for Jules Verne when I was in my 20s, and I was travelling with, customers that sometimes were older and had more experience and more travel stories. I think the connection with those clients, sitting around a table, having conversations. I remember one couple telling me that they'd gone to Petra on one of the first Jules Verne tours. They'd visited Jordan when we sort of first started doing escorted touring, which now is around 50 years ago. At the time, it was sort of around 40. And they had gone back to Petra and they'd gone back to Jordan, and they were telling me how much it had changed, but also how fundamentally it hadn't changed. And I think I'm incredibly lucky that people have shared their stories with me. So I not only have my own stories, but I also have these amazing memories that people have been, kind enough to share with me. And then from a sort of a personal point of view, I think I've been able to make connections of my own. I've traveled places. I've met people who I now call friends. I met my best friend, who's my daughter's godmother, in Sri Lanka, and we traveled around Sri Lanka together, and then we went to the Maldives, and now she lives in the UAE and I live in the UK, but we still have that connection. And modern technology is great in helping that, but ultimately our connection comes from that friendship that was built traveling and exploring. So I'm very lucky that I've had all these amazing experiences, but also people have been kind enough to share their memories and experiences with me too.
Where would you say, of all the places you've been to, where really touched your heart? Where do you feel you have a real connection with?
Oh gosh, that's really hard. I think it's really hard. And I know I ask our guests on the podcast this question and they also say the same thing, but it is hard. It is hard to kind of pick maybe one. I would say the first thing that comes to mind is India. It was a destination I wasn't sure whether I wanted to go. I think I had kind of maybe talked myself out of India being somewhere that I would want to go. And I went and it was incredible. And I did a cooking class in someone's home. Wow. She was an amazing cook and I am a terrible cook. As much as we love food on this podcast, I am a terrible cook. So, being in someone's kitchen and learning to cook something that I would never be able to cook at home, but someone taking that time to teach me was incredible. And the people in India, they just were so welcoming, and it was incredible to see the destination outside of what you typically think, Taj Mahal, Ranthambore Safari. I really got to spend time with locals and local guides. And again, I'm very lucky that my other best friend, my daughter's other godmother is Indian. So I get to have that kind of flavor from her, and she gets to take me, and I get to explore it from a completely different side as well, kind of getting under the skin. Egypt as well is another one that really has captured my heart. It's a magical destination. It's somewhere with so much history, the kings, the pharaohs. It's incredible, and they're so proud of Egypt. Everybody you speak to is essentially a walking ambassador for Egypt. And again, I've been incredibly lucky to go there a number of times. I've been there when it's been really busy, and I've been there when it's been really quiet. And I think it's just the history, the culture, the mix of old and new, the fact that it's, it's a destination steeped in history, steeped in culture, but also a really cosmopolitan place as well, with some really cosmopolitan cities and restaurants. And it's a real fusion of everything. And I absolutely love it. Yeah. So it's another destination, I think, that has really captured my heart. And ultimately, Africa is always going to be on that top of that list as well, for obvious reasons.
It's interesting because it's probably no coincidence that Egypt is a destination we've visited a lot with our different guests, and we've had that little kind of group of 3 episodes together where we went from Tarek and Rania, so for our listeners that don't know, we have a podcast previously called Passepartout People and Places, and there are a lot of episodes on there. And we kind of rebranded, reshaped, restarted a new season, renaming the podcast Travel for Curious Minds. But it's still about people and about stories and so on. Anyway, Tarek and Rania featured on their previous incarnation of the podcast, and we reshared that episode relatively recently, actually, on Travel for Curious Minds. But we did it with the intention of then knowing that Debbie was going to see the opening of the gem in Egypt. So Tarek and Rania had talked about the lead up to the opening. Debbie then talked about the opening of the gem, and then we spoke to Mahal, a formidable Egyptian woman who had so many stories to tell. It was so interesting.
I will tell you something very strange, Abbey, which I tell to my clients. You're not here to visit Egypt. You're here to visit the heritage of mankind. It's all our ancestors. It's not only Egypt. It happened to be now it's called Egypt. But actually, it is the heritage of all mankind.
The other thing that surprised me was the cultural shift around women in Egypt, and how the culture of Egypt is changing, and and dealing with this sort of shift from maybe how it was previously to how it is now. And Mahal very openly, she talked about her divorce, didn't she? And she talked about some of those challenges. So what did you like about those episodes?
What I love about it is when we look back at that first episode, we were so excited to talk about the Grand Egyptian Museum being built and opening. Tarek had sort of snuck us in a few stories of what was to come. And we were so excited. And I remember that episode being like, I can't wait to go to the gem. And then moving forward, we had Debbie, our managing director, who had gone to the grand opening of the Egyptian Museum and was able to say firsthand what it was like, what you're going to see, how different it was to the old Grand Egyptian Museum. And then we move on to Mahal, who is a guide who's guiding people around the museum and the rest of Egypt as well. And I think those 3 episodes, just for me, it was just continued excitement for what was coming next. And I think Egypt as a whole, it is that kind of destination where you're like, what are they going to do next? What else are they going to discover? Yeah. What else are we going to learn? Because as Mahal said, it really is the birthplace of mankind, and everything sort of leads back to Egypt and Egyptology. And it was incredible over those 3 episodes to kind of have that excitement build and build and build. And yes, there's not a conclusion yet, but there'll be more things I'm sure we'll share in the future about Egypt and what else there is to discover.
I found it really interesting as we've made these episodes. A lot of them kind of fall. There's some themes are developing with no intent on our part, but one of them is very much about solo women travellers, and people like Joe, Rachel, Portia, their stories around having gone from getting that travel bug at an early age. And some of them have been on some like proper adventures, haven't they?
Yeah.
They really have. I think Joe Kessel was our first episode after the trailer with Travel for Curious Minds, and she kicked it off with some proper stories, didn't she?
Yeah, go with Joe. One of my favourite episodes, one of my favourite conversations, although I've loved them all. I think Joe's ability to drop herself into anywhere in the world on her own, discover a destination, get to know people, is incredible. And her stories reflect that. And I remember Joe talking about her trip to Antarctica.
And it's just bigger and more epic than anything you can ever possibly imagine. And I'm just stepping foot on land and having the penguins waddling all around you is just mind-blowing. And there was not a moment that I was on land that I wasn't thinking, wow, it's like a pinch me moment. I am here. It's kind of, you think this is where expeditioners go. It's not where regular Joe blogs go with Joe goes. It's for a different type of person. But of course, the beauty of travel now is that you can do these trips to anywhere. It's possible to do it and go to places you never thought was possible, and to do it responsibly as well.
She spoke about cruising on the Mekong in Vietnam. And then she talked about going to northern India, the Golden Temple, and her experience there as well. And then we had Portia Jones's episode, which was an episode I absolutely loved. Again, I loved hearing about her passion for travel and the fact that she was so young, picking up a guidebook at 18, deciding that she was going to travel locally as a domestic tourist, and then think, no, I'm going further afield. And the fact that she can talk so confidently about the 70 plus countries that she's visited as well, and the connection she's made and how she's inspiring the next generation as well. That was just an episode that I was just flabbergasted with how incredible she was. We had her in New Zealand making friends on buses.
The group of friends that I met, again, still friends to this day. We've gone to each other's weddings, we've gone on holidays together. They're all coming down now in October for my birthday, and we're going to hang out. It's just wonderful. And I think that's the thing about travel. Sometimes we can all be so focused on, I must see the Grand Canyon or the Eiffel Tower or the Taj Mahal. And those are all epic things, don't get me wrong. But I really think the best part about travel for me is meeting new people and learning about new cultures and things like that. I find that a much more rewarding aspect of being on the road.
Then she travelled to Uzbekistan, seeing all the Russian architecture, meeting the amazing people, all the way to volcanoes in Japan.
Something that our listeners may not know is with the audio podcasts, I work hard to add in some sound design, some sound effects, as people often call them. Where possible, I work really hard to make sure that the sound design is authentic and it's from the place we're talking about. Or if I can't get anything from the actual place we're talking about, certainly it's authentic. It's those people, it's that part of the world. But the other thing that we've made a transition with this podcast is we've moved to video, haven't we? So we didn't start off with video, and these earlier episodes we're talking about, they are audio only podcasts. If you want to go and have a listen to them, listener, we'll put the links in the description so you can go back and listen to them. But they are audio only, and we kind of moved into the video podcasting element more recently. But they're great fun to make. I love the challenge of hearing these stories and then thinking, right, how can I bring that to life, and how can I put some sound and some audio in there to kind of, really give it heart and bring it to life. It's hard work, but I enjoy it.
And I think we've had some incredible stories that you have had to spend hours trying to find the sound for. I think it's really important that we need to be proud of how authentic we are being with our podcast. The idea behind the podcast is to transport you to different places around the world, to make you curious to travel, to open up new destinations and kind of give you new horizons. So to have the authentic sounds of a destination that you might one day visit yourself, I think is really important. And I know that, you know, we are, as a team at Jules Verne, really proud of what we've achieved with this podcast.
Well, there's absolutely a relationship between how Jules Verne work and that kind of authentic experience, whether it's a tour, whether it's a guided tour or a cruise, people actually experiencing that authentic real world and not the all-inclusive hotel locked up package kind of holiday. And I think that's where we've got a really strong relationship between what we do with the podcast and that kind of message of authenticity and what Jules Verne do for their customers. Talking about authenticity, what about Rachel Lankester?
Yes, Rachel's episode. I think she was probably one of the first guests who brought the theme of not just only women traveling solo, but women in midlife traveling solo. And the adrenaline you get from going somewhere on your own and experiencing something different. I think I remember Rachel had been traveling for a really long time and, you know, was great with languages and cultures and all of that. But the theme that came across with her episode was trying new things, getting out there, and just kind of putting yourself in slightly uncomfortable situations that are safe.
She talked about North Korea. That for me came from nowhere, the Arirang Games.
That was crazy. And I went solo to North Korea, but you have to go on a tour. It's about 10 years ago now, I think, and maybe even longer than that. And we went to Pyongyang, and we went to, it was all geared around the Arirang Games. And the Arirang Games is this spectacular gymnastic dance performance that you would only find in a very heavily communist state, because they wouldn't be able to get enough people together to do it all together. And the backdrop, it changed with every scene. And it was a series of cards held up by children. And the precision with which this changed every, 5-10 minutes, maybe even less than that, they'd all be changing their cards. And there must have been, I think, 3,000 people in the backdrop or something bonkers like that. So that was amazing.
Do you know how hard it is to find a sound effect of the Arirang Games?
I can imagine, but you did it. And that, again, it's that connection, isn't it? It's finding those authentic sounds. So it's probably somewhere that I might not ever be able to go to, but I can say that I've firsthand now heard those, the sounds from that destination.
Something else that came to light, and this started to happen as the episodes went on, is you're asking people at the end for tips. And, when you're traveling, what are your top tips? And particularly we do those in the quickfire episodes. But with Rachel, things like downloading the app from the taxi company when you're this side, finding out who the taxi company is, getting their app and download that now, or things like eSIMs or doing your research ahead of time. And it was Rachel that talked about dressing like locals. So there's that theme of strong women, midlife women, and we've got Eleanor, we've got the Blue Tits episode. There were lots of other episodes, weren't there, where we covered that. But then the other area that seems to have kind of come to life is this sense of adventure, and and travel not being about a package holiday in a hotel, but stepping outside of your comfort zone. And people don't get much more adventurous than Charlie Mayhew, do they?
No, definitely not. From a personal point of view, one of Charlie Mayhew's episode was probably one of my favourite conversations. And again, I'm sure I've said that before about lots of things, but I think his journey into the conservation area is just incredible. And the stories of travelling through in broken down cars and, giving people a little bit of money on the side of the road to help fix things.
We then had the challenge of trying to rebuild the vehicle in the middle of effectively desert. But the mechanical team were amazing. They managed to sort of create a sort of Heath Robinson with sort of ropes and using the odd tree to help pivot and stretch bits of metal and bend the vehicle back into some sort of shape so that we could keep on going. And that vehicle did make its way all the way back down to Cape Town, even though it was slightly crabbing down the road every day. But, we had that problem. I was arrested in Zaire by what turned out very quickly to be a group of corrupt border guards who just saw an opportunity to try and extort some money from us. But we had to go through the charade of them setting up a kangaroo court in the jungle before they decided on what fine they were going to slap on me.
His ability to connect with people, in the 90s, very early 90s, he was traveling around, connecting with locals and educating people on the effects of poaching and how to really, limit the damage that was being done. And his work through his charities and his connections around the world has made a huge impact on the wildlife, but also the culture and the sustainability element of lots of places within Africa. And it was an incredible story.
It's no wonder he's an OBE and has royal connections, because the impact that he is having is remarkable. And as you've said, kind of his journey from in the 90s, just get in a car and drive to Cape Town and then try and physically stop this poaching from taking place, and that kind of evolving into, I remember him talking about, when local people lose a field of maize, their inclination is not to want to protect the animals that have done that. And so that balance around winning local people over and that conservation work, whilst at the same time getting people on side and so on, is a talented fella.
Really, and such an inspiration of the years and the dedication he's put into protecting so much wildlife, which you're right, locals often can see as pests, but maybe outside of that, obviously they're not pests to us, they're animals that need to be protected. And navigating those lines and navigating those conversations with locals is, I can imagine, incredibly hard. So I loved that conversation, but I loved his sense of adventure. I loved that, like you said, he just hopped in a car and did it. And I think that sense of adventure has been in a number of our conversations.
Speaking of adventure, we spoke to David O'Neill in October. That was an interesting story, wasn't it?
Yeah, David O'Neill MBE, his episode was completely different to our normal conversations. Normally we talk about the wants to travel, to be exploring a new destination, meeting new people, but a lot of David's travels were he had to go. He was, part of an international rescue team, and how he was going to these destinations, essentially being the first people there after a huge devastating impact, whether that be earthquakes, landslides, floods. It was a really interesting conversation to hear the different side of travel that's maybe not necessarily people picking a place to go to because they want to visit there and see the culture and see the destination. This was going there as a matter of life and death to help people when they're in the most vulnerable moments.
I remember him talking about when he went to Delhi, he did a Delhi by Dawn tour, which I think from memory he said that they took their son on, and he was talking about how there are a lot of homeless people in Delhi and they're laying in the street under a blanket, and it's kind of giving him flashbacks to those awful scenarios with earthquakes in Nepal and tricky stuff.
Really tricky. And I think his ability to put different hats on when he's traveling is probably something that maybe he didn't recognize, but I think it came across on the podcast really well that, when he goes into disaster zones, he's one David O'Neill, but when he's traveling, he's dad, husband, and he's, traveling with his family and experiencing things in a very different way. And yes, he has those flashbacks, but he was able to navigate how to show his son the positive cultures there is. And it must be a really tricky thing to do. I have a lot of admiration for what he does.
I remember him talking about training some, in Islamabad, training some teams in water rescue, and how the team consisted, interestingly, of a majority of women were running that rescue team, and women coming from different cultures. So some were very traditional, wearing a headdress and so on. Others were in more sort of Western clothing and having to navigate those conversations. So to respect the cultural differences, whilst at the same time making sure everyone gets the same level of support. It was some swift water rescue stuff he was doing, which was interesting, and how that joining up. So right back from sort of the family history of grandparents and Delhi and so on, and then doing that train tour in Shimla to recreate that journey and so on was interesting.
And I remember her telling stories about India. She was very, very fond of India, and showing me photographs of these huge military parades with, thousands of soldiers, officers on horseback and elephant back. Seeing this stuff must have sparked something in me. Also, her stories of moving the whole garrison from Delhi when it got too hot up to Shimla. And that was a journey actually that my wife and I recreated some years later, taking the toy train up to Shimla. But all of these stories and all these photographs, all very happy, positive memories, I think must have inspired my desire for travel.
The other thing was getting stuck on a plane, trying to get into Nepal, and the plane running out of fuel, and then having to land in India with no visas and finding their way to get back to Nepal. Was some proper adventure there, isn't there?
Yeah, I think that's probably the key theme of David's podcast was adventure travel, and definitely a completely different side of adventure travel than we've had before on the podcast.
But also, again, at the end, actually, David's tips were about, and this is a number of people say this: learn about the country, get outside of your comfort zone, and take some US currency, because wherever you go, US currency can get you out of trouble. What about Lucy? That was a good conversation, wasn't it? Lucy Meggesonson.
Yeah, Lucy's episode, again, really intriguing conversation. Her desire to travel came from a period of not being very well, being signed off from the GP, taking a break from work and just sitting there in London and thinking, there's more and I want to visit more and explore more and see more. And I think one of the things she said was about sort of hopping in a hire car and just kind of seeing where you end up. And again, it's her version of adventure travel, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And right from that sort of epiphany of sitting outside her flat in London and deciding, do you know what, actually, it's okay to be single, and kind of leaning into that and owning that. The other thing I like was she likes the States a lot, doesn't she? And she talked about this journey that she did where she went from, I think from memory, she flew into New York, then drove down to Provincetown in Cape Cod, and then drove back to New York to see a gig. Because she also talked a lot about music, didn't she? And being motivated by music and wanting to go to the places that her heroes are from. And then Lucy ended up talking about somewhere that she wants to go, being Costa Rica. You know about Costa Rica, don't you?
Yes, I do. Costa Rica, again, a destination I didn't think I was ever going to probably go to. It kind of entered the bucket list a bit left field. But yeah, she did talk about how she wanted to go to Costa Rica and visit the cloud forest, see the wildlife. I'm very lucky. I've been to Costa Rica twice, and I'd go back in a heartbeat.
Really?
I think a lot of people say, I don't think I'd go back to a destination again. But actually the theme on the podcast with our guest has been that they are going back to destinations again, because they're visiting them years later, or they're visiting a different area, or they're kind of going to the secret hidden gems of those destinations. So I think I used to be one of those people that was, I would never go back to the same destination. The world's so big, you've got to explore everything. But I think there's something to be said of exploring everything, or exploring things well and really understanding where you are and what your eyes are taking in, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and a couple of guests have talked about all of those senses, sense of taste and what you can smell and hear, that whole experience. So, Abbey, we could talk about our episodes till the cows come home, and what we'll do is we'll reshare some of these episodes over the next few weeks while we're taking our recording break, and we're off recording new episodes for the new season. But you often end an episode or a conversation with a guest talking about where's next for them. So I'm going to ask you the same question. Where's next for you? Where haven't you been that either you're going to or you really want to go to?
I think back to when we started this podcast. For me personally, I have got married since. I have had a baby since. So that list kind of has to change a little bit. I have always loved the idea of taking my husband and now my daughter back to Zimbabwe, of them seeing Victoria Falls, hearing the roar of the water. It's something that I will never forget the first time I heard, and never forget the last time I heard actually either. But I think one of the destinations that's kind of always been up there on the list is Antarctica. Going to somewhere that I believe is probably one of the last truly untouched places in the world. And I think people are incredibly lucky to, hear the cracking of the ice and feel the cold wind on their cheeks. I think that would be incredible to see. And I'm sure my daughter would love to see the penguins. But I think where's next, as with all of our guests, travel changes throughout your life. And probably at the moment in my personal life, travel looks a little bit different. So it is very much visiting friends and family around the world, taking my daughter to see her godmother in the Middle East, taking my daughter to see her godmother in India. And for me, just kind of hopefully she'll be sitting here in 25, 30 years time talking about her travel experiences, how she traveled really young and how she got to broaden her horizons. So for me personally, Antarctica, but I think as a family, anything that can have an impact and inspire my daughter to open her mind and broaden her horizons, even though she's nearly 2.
I love that, full circle. So we've gone from talking to our guests about how they started their travel journey, how you started your travel journey, and ending up back with where you want to go and how you're going to inspire your daughter to be able to answer those questions when she's in her 20s and 30s and so on. That's exciting stuff. Gore, blimey, we have covered a lot of stuff. What have we not covered that you wanted to talk about? What can I ask you that I haven't asked you?
I think we've been around the world, haven't we, during our time doing this podcast? And I think Jules Verne lends itself obviously very well to around the world in 80 days. But I think we have been around the world in more than 80 stories, and it's been incredible. Some of my favourite conversations have to be things like Gareth from Rovos Rail talking about the different side of traveling within a destination and how you can step back in time and just completely switch off from the modern world and immerse yourself in where you are, all the way to talking to Simon Reeve of all people,
of course, and
hearing his stories and his adventure of being in destinations that maybe he shouldn't have quite been in, or getting himself into trouble in sticky situations, and how everyone is kind of connected. There's been some amazing conversations and amazing stories. And also hearing the stories of people from Jules Verne as well. Ultimately, we are storytellers. We are travellers and storytellers. And hearing things like Lauren in Algeria, a destination I'd love to go to now after listening to the podcast, hearing about Laura and her adventures in Pakistan, Debbie and her travels to Egypt and beyond. And I think working in Jules Verne is incredible. We're such a small company. We all know each other. But do we necessarily take the time to really hear each other's stories? And the podcast has allowed for that. We've had some incredible guests like Carmel, who's come on the podcast, who works within our team and shared stories of, her childhood in Ireland and growing up and traveling. So there's lots of things I think we can talk about, but I think we don't have enough time. And I'm sure our listeners and viewers would love to hear more, and maybe that's for another future episode.
Well, absolutely. And we have got a lot of exciting destinations lined up. But I think, thinking about what you've just said there, you're spot on it isn't about the destination or the country. It's about the story, and the best stories coming out of where things haven't quite gone to plan, or they haven't quite happened in the way that the person would have planned to do. Some of those great stories coming out of that stuff. So lots of good episodes in the can, and lots of good episodes being recorded. So Abbey, first of all, thank you for letting me be the host for this episode. It's been interesting, actually. I've enjoyed it. Thank you. But as the real host of Travel for Curious Minds, I'll hand over to you to finish the episode.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you, everyone, for joining us once again. While we take our end of season break and we are recording new episodes with amazing guests and amazing stories, this is the perfect time to go back and listen to some conversations that may have intrigued you in the past, you may not have heard of. And we'll also share lots of our favourite episodes going forward as well. So we're not completely going, we're just having a little break to bring you more amazing travel stories and more amazing guests.